Up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here. Thank you as always for tuning in. Today is Best Served Podcast 300, people. 300 times we've recorded, gone live, been in front of you. Such an honor. And this is an important topic, more important than I even realized 2.5 months ago when we were deciding on Best Served Volume 1, ease of ordering, what we were going to talk about. Does to-go packaging matter? It's a resounding yes. And we want to really understand and navigate that. This is 7 of 8 and Best Served Custom. Brand new channel. I was really fascinated. We get tunnel vision sometimes in restaurants, food and beverage, breweries, distilleries, wineries, everything. We're so focused on the product. We're so focused on butts and seats. Sometimes it's hard to understand what's happening on outside of our four walls. And so this idea of getting experiences and expectations directly from the customer became more and more important. And so this channel and this series has been really informational for me, and I think brought a lot of value. So I'm excited about that. We got 3 guests with us to speak on the topic today. Josh Michelle, Susie Kim, Dev Adams are with us, and we're going to dig into that. I want to kind of disclaimer this a little bit because there's so much to unpack when we started digging in on both the customer side and the restaurant side of to-go packaging. So what we're going to talk about is kind of our expectation moving forward. We know that over the last year, it's been incredibly difficult for restaurants to even be able to get access to-go containers. From one week to the next, they may have a completely different lineup of containers. And so the thoughtfulness and creativity that goes into so much of food and beverage has been lost in many points for sure. And we realize and understand that. Now is the time for us to start thinking forward. We recognize that to-go is going to be a massive part of food and beverage, of restaurants, of all sectors of food and beverage moving forward. So what do we do now? And we want to understand what our expectations are. And so on that topic, we'll kind of go around the horn here. Josh, I'll start with you. On that topic, to-go packaging, you mentioned you are making decisions. You are thinking about that. It does have an impact. It may not be the only thing you're thinking about. At a high level, set the tone for us. What's your expectation when it comes to-go packaging?
I've seen all sorts of different things. One of the things I, personally is I'm a graphic designer in the beer industry. And a year ago, breweries started to just not have taproom traffic. So they had to pivot to packaging beer, which is just as crazy. Most of these breweries didn't think they would package beer ever. Now Right. They're packaging beer. So that's something that I just thought of 10 seconds ago.
Yeah.
But in terms
delivering beer, all of a sudden, all these series were delivering beer, and to-go beer became big too.
Yeah, you have to get, curbside stuff, and there's all new rules. I personally hope that carry out cocktails is a thing for the rest of my life.
Yes,
yes. And it seems like maybe it's a thing. In terms of the food, certain things travel better, like a burrito. All you need is a little foil. It goes in a bag. It can go anywhere. The frustrating thing to me sometimes is if you order a burger, even if you go pick it up yourself, you're not doing a delivery service. By the time you get it home, it's so soggy. And
it's the number one complaint item that I've come across, that anybody I've talked to, soggy French fries and a sopping wet bun for a burger and fries, number one vulnerability that we're seeing right now.
I can fix the fries with the air fryer. The bun is, you're effed. You can't get it back. Yeah. So, for me personally, I would love some sort of, I don't want more packaging, but some sort of deconstructed thing with simple, I can put a burger on a bun. I can add the lettuce and the tomato, even in the order I prefer. Yeah. I would be all about it, I want to support these restaurants that, I'm not going to very often. I think I've eaten in a restaurant in Colorado 3 or 4 times in the last year.
Yeah.
So I really want to support these businesses that I love and people that I know, who own and work at these restaurants. And I don't mind a little bit of assembly, at all. I'd prefer it. If you're spending, $50 to $100 for some fancy meal, I don't mind a little bit if it's going to taste better.
Josh, you got us right into something that I'm so passionate about, which is literally next week's episode. It's called Plating Like a Chef at Home. And it's about the opportunity for some assembly required at home and making it interactive. A little QR code on the outside takes you to a video showing you how to finish things. I think there's a need for that. And Susie, I want to come to you kind of thinking about that as well. Josh mentioned something important. I don't necessarily want more packaging. I do want the opportunity to have a fighting chance to have my food not be a sopping, messy, cold, congealed mess. So when you're thinking about that, when you're thinking about your expectation of the food and you're thinking about the to-go packaging, and does it all of a sudden mean that you have a burger and fries has 4 to-go containers? That feels a little icky to me as well. So how do you kind of navigate that? What maybe is your expectation thinking about that?
So, yeah, I had definitely have gotten perturbed by the soggy food mess that you mentioned. I think that moving forward, we're getting smarter about how to do things and adding things like ventilation holes or those little punched out, like almost hole with the flap to help remedy that. But I think that if we can just, I guess, take a step back when we're doing planning, menu planning, and do some mock to-go packaging and do testing and, let it sit for half an hour in there, see what happens, let it sit for 15 minutes, see the progression of what happens to the food. And I think it's also big to communicate with people at home. And even if it's like a simple, silly note, like, hey, like things suck right now in terms of supply, like cut us a break a little, you maybe encourage future business with like a little 5% discount code or something that they could use, just to let them know that you're mindful, you're trying to help the situation. Also maybe getting out to people in general via social media, like things that you've been doing, like communicating to people like that. Right now it is a difficult time. Restaurants are going through an enormous amount of transition.
It's true.
And we need an understanding from people that we're human just like they are, and that it's just difficult. We're trying our best. But yeah, I think innovation is definitely something that has happened over this pandemic. And we've had to become very creative to get by. So
yeah. Restaurant people are some of the most adaptable people you will come across. Sometimes for better or worse, we're constantly pivoting. That's like the status quo of our interaction, which means that we're not very proactive and forward thinking a lot of the times. We are such counterpunchers. And I think it's time for us to take a step back and think about the big picture of what's happening. So I appreciate that for sure. The communication has to get better for restaurants. It's very interesting because when somebody's in our dining room, we're brilliant communicators. Yet the second they're not in our dining room, it's like it all falls apart. We, for some reason, can't figure out how to use this to communicate with people. We, for some reason, can't figure out how to let people know this is what's happening with us. And in the delivery apps episode, we talked about that, where it's like, do the QR code instead of the video for plating, as we were talking about. You're like, hey, it's really difficult for us right now. I'm so grateful that you ordered food from us. If ever the opportunity comes up for you to pick up from us directly as a small business that really supports us, like that would change people's potential interaction. So I really appreciate that for sure. I think so important. Dev, for you. All right. To-go packaging. When we had you on, you talked about something that I think is interesting. Feeds into what Sophie said. We were talking a little bit about websites, and you talked about the Bubba test, and it's basically getting the Luddite person in your group to test and push every button and see if they can figure out how to utilize your website. I know Josh, that resonates with him as somebody who designs website. Susie mentioned just leave it in a container for 30 minutes. To me, that feels like the Bubba test for food. We don't do that enough. Like, we don't actually go through that process, because to-go has always been kind of just this, it's this other thing. We'll do it obligatorily. We're not focused on it. So give me an idea there for you. You have to drive, you mentioned 40 minutes. Like, the integrity of that food or the quality of the to-go container has a big impact on the food at the end. think about that a little bit. Bubba test, that's your thing. I appreciate you gifting us that.
So for me, it makes a big difference if it's something that I'm going to need to reheat, which 90% of the time it is, if I can either reheat directly in that packaging that I got, or it's packaging that's easy enough for me to get the food out of that I can reheat it on my own. So so paper packaging, even though it's wonderful because it's recyclable, stuff sticks to the paper and you end up losing some of that food. Aluminum doesn't have that same issue, which is really nice. But another thing that
just don't throw that in the microwave to reheat it.
Well, we don't even own a microwave. Ours may or may not have exploded a couple weeks ago. So we
due to foil wrapped around the burrito that Josh mentioned. Oh, that's what a bummer. I hear you.
But for me, also, like, reusable containers are a huge deal. They make a huge difference when we're talking, like, I mean, again, like Josh, I'm from the beer industry. And so we are used to reusable containers in the form of growlers. And, they date back to the 1800s when, you had these buckets with lids on them. And supposedly the term growler comes from the noise the CO2 would make bubbling out. Well, we don't actually, the reusable growlers we see now didn't exist until 1989. Prior to that, we were actually using kind of, I think, Chinese food containers, like wax lined containers for beer. And then it was the Otto brothers up in Wyoming who came up with what we know now as the glass growler. And so in the past, people would bring growlers in, you'd refill them, and it was this perfect reusable container. Well, in the pandemic, there was a lot of problem with that because you didn't know how sanitary it was.
Right.
So what a lot of breweries have been doing is swap outs instead. So you bring a growler in, they take it from you, they give you a new one, but then they clean and sanitize the growler, and then it goes back into the stream. So it's not you're not risking any cross-contamination. You're not risking worrying about if someone cleaned it or not. And it's a great reusable container. So I'd love to see more restaurants explore that. I know there are a couple of companies, one in Portland and one in New York, that are doing reusables. But that makes a big deal to me too. Like, if I'm going to eat out, if it's not recyclable or reusable, I feel a little weird about it.
Let's get into this specifically about the potential to pay more for something that's more thoughtful. What you're talking about has the potential to have a deposit on it, right? That then is recouped somehow. You're signing up for a subscription. You're part of a club. Like, there's some way that there is an expectation, maybe just outright. And I'll come back around the group. Are you making that decision? Are you willing to pay a couple cents, a couple dollars more if that packaging is thoughtful? Josh, for you?
I would consider it. That was in the Facebook post thread. I thought that was really interesting. And when you were talking about the delivery apps and going to Fadui and getting like styrofoam hell, like, I get that from Fun 95, and it's so good. And I like those guys.
Breaks my heart because I'm ruining our planet. Yet pho is it's the only thing that I will absorb, one, calling on the phone, and two, just like pretend like I don't see all that styrofoam. It breaks my heart. And then I have the pho and I'm so happy. And then I put away the to-go containers for leftovers and I feel like shit again. And then, like, it's this vicious cycle. It's important. And I think we need to, like, reflect on it. And so I'm already, like, owning my own mistake with pho. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. So I don't want to have any more impact. I've already had as much bad impact as I could possibly put and still be a reasonable human being. And so now, unfortunately, for the rest of anybody I order food from, if you have styrofoam, it's a deal breaker for me, even though I'm being a total hypocrite, and I completely understand that.
Well, it's a pretty big ship to steer, the entire restaurant industry, right? Yeah. And everyone's got their own plans and, margins and stuff like that. Funnily, like, I'm interested in what this situation is like around the world, because, like, takeout doggy bags, like, doesn't exist in Europe. And 10 years ago, I was in Spain, and you have to eat paella when you're in Spain. And it was, like, right around the corner from where I was staying. And I was like, well, was looking it up on my phone, how to say to go in Spanish, my, like, high school level Spanish. We just para llevar, just so in case you guys need to know, to take. And they were like, we don't do that. And then I was like, well, I have this gigantic plate of paella, like, with chicken feet and, the whole shebang.
Like, make some friends.
And so the way it worked is, and it was so hard for him to explain to me that for €5 deposit, they would just put a big plate with tinfoil over it, and I'd take it back and bring it back and get my deposit back. And when I brought it back 3 days later, they were like completely fucking surprised that I would have ever done it. But like, I think that is a little bit unreasonable to
It's
expect.
very European,
also.
old school European, but there you have a point, right? Like that there needs to be a thoughtful expectation and transaction if that's what you're looking for. And if you can recoup it, great. And if it means you have to pay a little bit more, I think, you said you might be open to it. So it's not like a slam dunk. It has to like make sense on multiple levels. I think that's a good point. Any other thought on that?
Maybe if the larger restaurant groups put together a coalition, like I don't want to know about politics between all of these big groups, but
You just made somebody real mad, Josh.
I'm sure I did. It's normal for me. Maybe if they could come up with some sort of more standardized thing that you could bring back, and even if you bring it back and you get 10% off or something, maybe that's an option. I don't know. Logistically, it sounds like a mess to me, but I would be all for it.
Either way, Josh. I appreciate that. Look at Vegas. There's a lot of places where in Vegas they have the same to-go type cups. Some have completely disposable cups. Other do have ones that are like solid hard plastic ones where between venues they'll take those in, and they're big enough operations where they are. So look, has it been done before? Not necessarily. Can it be? Or you're going to be stuck, and if you're stuck, you're vulnerable. And so like I think there's an opportunity there. Susie, same kind of question for you on the financial side. I really want to understand this. Are you, let's say a product, a soup, a broth, something was going to come in a styrofoam container. Would you be willing to pay 50 cents more to have it put into a reusable plastic deli with a solid lid that you could then wash and reuse later? Is that the kind of thing you'd be interested in? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's completely reasonable. From an operation like cost standpoint and covering your costs, and I think that it probably could resonate with a lot of people just because we want to think that we're more mindful as people and as consumers, and that we are helping for the greater good. So as long as you can position it that way, I think people will be understanding. And there's probably going to be the possibility of some pushback in terms of like people don't want to order. But I don't think 50 cents is a deal breaker. I also think that maybe in terms of like that coalition that you were talking about, that could be something that maybe Denver restaurants can do to band together to have purchasing power, and to ask your vendors and your distributors for like a better margin schedule, so you're only paying a certain percentage above costs for your items, whatever market price is. I just think that people could work together a little bit more.
Could not agree more. It comes back to the same mindset mentality that I mentioned earlier, where we're good when we have butts and seats, which means we're tunnel visioned on the four walls of the restaurant, the brewery, all of it. It's hard to see outside of that and notice that there's other people going through the same shit you are, and the potential to support each other. It's hard when they're also your competition. So it's like, how do we think about co-opetition? Like, how do we start to like shift that mindset? Deb, I want to come to you and kind of stay on this a little bit, because as I was hearing Susie talk and what Josh kind of brought up at the onset is like, we know craft brewers that specifically are buying pallets and pallets and pallets of 16 ounce, 19 ounce cans together to be able to offset cost. And so I think there's an opportunity there. Maybe thinking about that a little bit, do you see that opportunity for restaurants as well? Maybe give us a little understanding of what's happening in craft beer, because we know that that's happening because the cost is so high for craft canning.
Well, and I think we're really lucky in Colorado specifically, but the craft beer industry in America in general, that we're very collaborative. That it's competition, but it's friendly competition. That just because we're offering, an IPA doesn't mean that the guy down the block who's also offering an IPA, that doesn't mean that we're losing customers to them, unless they're offering a significantly better product or experience. So I think we're really collaborative. You're right. People have been buying up a ton of cans as a group and splitting them out. You see it every day in our industry group on Facebook where people are saying, hey, I need a pallet of 12 ounces. Anyone have those? I need a pallet of crowlers, especially when we were having the huge crowler shortage. Crowling Rental Company, which is based here in Colorado, they were working with all of their breweries to make sure everyone was taken care of. And then if they had leftovers, they were reaching out to other breweries outside of their customers saying, hey, we've got crowlers. And they weren't gouging or anything like that. They were just like, hey, we've got some extras. We saw you were looking. Do you still need them? Same thing with looking for kegs, or the number of equipment orders that have gone through as a group. So it's very, very collaborative and really nice. And I think there is a huge opportunity, like Susie was saying, especially in Denver or any kind of city group of restaurants, to come together and be like, okay, so this is something that our customers have said is important to us. How do we leverage our power to make this a reality? How can we come together and have the Denver Restaurant Association help us out? And maybe they have branded to-go containers that just say Denver Restaurant Association or what have you. And those can be brought back to any of the participating restaurants. So that way, again, you've got that buying power. Let's say you only have 4 different containers between all of these restaurants. That would be not terribly difficult to manage. And it would definitely be friendlier for customers. And I would be stoked if let's say I get my pizza at Hops and Pie and I get a soup, and then I have that container and I can use that soup container again when I go downtown. I can drop it off and swap it out, for pho or something. So I think that there's a huge opportunity there for restaurants to work together and take a lesson from the craft beer folk.
Yep, I like that a lot. I'm a broken record. Everything boils down to a few essential things, and mindset is so important to me. We're so in survival mode, scarcity mindset. It's like, how do we get to growth and abundance mindset in restaurants? And it's hard when you are so reactionary to counterpunching every ticket that comes in, every request from a guest, versus thinking long-term. In craft beer, you need to be thinking about, you're planning out your whole year. All of your flagships, all of your mainstays, all of your seasonals. So you have the opportunity when you're thinking like that to think about the long-term investment of the cans. And then you start to say, how can I be creative within that space? Because I know I'm going to be committed to it. We now need to say we're committed to-go packaging. We have to be as a restaurant industry. So then the next question is, who can help me with that? Who also is going to need that? And I think that's the mindset shift. We need to think more long-term, because if we are doing that and not thinking like next week and next week and next week, and that's as far forward as we can think, that creates a vulnerability. So I really appreciate that. I love how tactical these things get. I always just am like, just tell me about your experiences. And then we just have such great guests, and all of you are just like deep thinkers of being like, here's some stuff. Here's some shit that will work. Here's some stuff that will matter. So I appreciate that. I want to take the last couple minutes and talk about innovation, which was mentioned, talk about creativity, see if there's any packaging where you've been like, that's different and I like it. And I wanted to throw this up, which came up from last week. This is Toki in Portland, Oregon. This is some of the sexiest to-go container packaging I have seen. There's branding left and right. There is directions on what to do. It's compartmentalized. Like, it just, to me, feels like somewhere I want to spend money. So this was an interesting, this was actually brought to us by a guest on the show who said, you got to go check out Toki. And I was like, yes, this is exactly it. Now, a couple things. One, that looks expensive, and it somewhat is, and it's customized and branded. Yet what's interesting in the long-term play is talking to some people in packaging is like, that's going to be expensive. Yet what you have the potential to do is buy a lot more units to drive that cost down. So if you're able to think long-term and make that capital investment, you're actually going to be spending less per unit than some of the to-go packaging you're doing currently. You just can't order based on cash flow. And I understand that's a struggle, yet that's where the industry is heading. That's what we need to be thinking about. And the interaction, like, I just feel like I'm a part of their story. Like, I've never even had their food, and I'm like, I love these guys. Like, I think that they're thinking about things interestingly. When I mentioned the QR codes, they're already doing this. So innovation in packaging, anything that you've seen, anything that has been interesting to you. Josh, I mean, you're a designer, so you're always thinking about kind of how things work together. Talk about to-go packaging. Any innovation you've seen or would like to see?
Well, I mean, if you go through U printing, you could get a box of one made, but it's probably $10. Like no one's going to pay extra for that. So, you know, the larger your runs are, the lower your volume prices can be.
We're talking like 50,000 probably is something.
Right, but the issue comes down to warehousing, and in Colorado, there's no warehouse space because everybody's growing weed there, pretty much, and so it can be tough. You know, I love supporting my local restaurants, even if I'm not going. But I also I want to support the restaurants that are out of state, right? And I got Facebook advertised a couple months ago from Piroshki in Seattle. You know, they're over by Pike Place, over by the Fake First Starbucks.
Yep.
And
been there, yeah.
It's like I go every time. I go skiing in Seattle like almost every year, and that's a must stop. And it's the powdered donut guy, and then Piroshki.
It's a good list.
They did a whole thing with Alaska Air, and you would pre-order Piroshkis, and then they would fly in at 6 a.m. or whatever, and then you'd meet up at this like random sketchy bookstore at like 40th and Grape, like right off I-70, and you would pick up a box of frozen Piroshkis, and it was like a $50 minimum. But I split it with my brother. We bought $200 worth of Piroshkis.
Oh.
And, you know, it gives me a chance to support them, which is I love, you know, and they come frozen. And if you go to Piroshki, they come in these like yellow, they're biodegradable bags.
Yep.
But we got 30 of like 7 or 8 different kinds. And they had like the little legend, you know, that told you what was what, but like not everything matched up. It wasn't all there. I mean, they're still figuring it out. I think we were the first one. And I reached out to them on Instagram. I was like, it would be so cool if you had stickers. And they wrote back and they were like, well, we need like 500,000 at a time. And if you get them for 1 cent a piece, then we would consider it. And I never had the time to bid it out, but it was so fun to be able to like get this, you know, food from somewhere that I'm not, have them bring it to me, and I get to support them. It took me and my wife like 30 minutes to sort of categorize and then vacuum seal and freeze.
You had to do inventory on your Piroshki.
It was a hurdle to overcome. But, you know, even if they didn't label them, I would totally order from them again. They're so damn good.
They are damn good, and it's the only reason that I ever go to Pike's Place. I'm a big fan of Seattle. It's the only reason that I ever go down there, because it is, you know, the throwing the fish and all that. I've seen that. I don't need to be a part of that. But anyway, what I like about what you just said is they've created brand, and their brand has now gone beyond their 4 walls. And now you're telling a story that a few thousand people will hear this story and go, huh, that was interesting. You've created brand, and the only thing that matters right now for people is their ability to get their brand out there, because your food better be fire. It better be good. Like, the food matters to that degree, yet all of the other interactions are so much more meaningful. And I can just tell, like, you are so committed, and that's what we need. We need people to be committed, so committed that somebody mentions Toki and we put a picture of their to-go packaging. These are the things that are going to transcend just the way we've done business to this point. So Josh, I really appreciate that. And I hope you do bid that out. I want to know what that's like, because there's some practicality that needs to be overcome.
When I have the time,
find places like Broomfield, Colorado, where there's a moratorium on marijuana, and find your warehouse there, right? Or all of the catacombs of restaurants across your city that probably have additional warehouse, or scale down your menu so you don't need as much room for, you know, X, Y, and Z ingredients, and that vinegar that's been sitting in the storage container for the last year and a half, like thoughtfully thinking about how to utilize your space. So I appreciate that. Total tangent, but I love it. I'm a big fan. All right, Susie, Dev, I want to come to you. Just last thoughts. Anything we didn't touch on for you? Anything that's top of mind for you, Susie?
It's a good question. I feel like we covered so much.
We did. We ran the gamut for sure. And if you just want a mic drop, just be like, I'm out. I feel you too, because I think this was really great. Your idea of coalition, I think, is so important. I think restaurants really need to communicate. Anything else from customer standpoint, anything else that you're thinking about that if restaurants were doing this, you'd care and they'd get your money? Take my money, please.
Yeah, well, honestly, I think now, because we're in a point of like recovery, this is the most important time to take everything that we've learned from over this time, but then also be mindful that there are going to be more shifts coming up. And some of those things are going to be unexpected. So I don't know if people can just remain flexible and communicate with each other, communicate with their customers. I think that they would really appreciate that a lot, and it would really show that they're being remembered and thought of, and this is why we're doing it. We're doing it for you, and really make it human again. Because yeah, this takeout business and going crazy, not having the same containers, and how much damage it could possibly do for people. But then, it's an opportunity for us to rise and really innovate, like you said, and just show people who we are, what we're capable of.
Oh, Susie, you're speaking my language. Thank you for that. That's so important. We have to find hospitality in every single interaction, no matter how foreign it feels for people that make things with their hands and interact with people face to face. Hospitality exists no matter where, if you care about people. And so I really appreciate that. Dev, the last word, what do you got for us?
So when you showed us that awesome little bento box, it made me think of the tiffins that they use in India, which are these stacked silver, they're steel containers, and you'll see guys riding all over India with these tiffins, and they bring them to the same offices every day, and the next day they'll pick up the dirty ones, drop off a clean one. And they're doing this in India, a place that is notorious for wasteful use of plastics and whatnot.
Yep.
And they're really with that, and then they're also using these really cool biodegradable bags instead of plastic bags now. So there's really some forward thinking happening around the world. And like with that bento box, I think that there are already lessons out there that people can take. The growler's another example that exists. And so it doesn't have to start from scratch. I think there's some beautiful lessons out there, and there's some cultures that maybe we don't usually look to for advice on not necessarily food itself, but on service that we could take those lessons back from.
And those are even closer to home. Dev, that is a brilliant way to end. I know places that are delivering those on the back of bike messengers or on scooters in LA, in New York. So there is absolutely a model for that. I had a crazy idea that people in downtown corridor should figure out how to get food delivered on electric scooters and get custom made backpacks to fit their food to go on scooters, because we started to see that people were declining downtown delivery app orders because it's really hard to get parking and get into those places. And so anyway, total tangent again, but there is opportunity and innovation. So amazing conversation. Thanks to all three of you. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. The answer, does to-go packaging matter? The answer is yes. The answer is going to be hard. The answer is we respect every struggle that everybody has gone to get to this point. And now, as we start recovery, even though there's going to be a lot of hiccups, the expectation is we want to-go packaging, we want hospitality in that process, and we want it to feel like that brand, to be thoughtful, to take care of the environment, to understand that we like cool stuff and we want to be taken care of even in our own homes. All right, that's it, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks, Josh, Dev, Susie. Thank you so much, you guys, for being on. Cheers.